Right, what's going on, guys? Welcome to the video. So on the Newsnight show last night, we had Sir William Pay, friend of Kim Darroch, who resigned as US ambassador yesterday, the Brexit Party MEP Richard Tice, and Times columnist Alice Thompson, joining the stand-in host Mark Urban. This panel is a 3-1 against Boris, Brexit and Trump. Of course, they're blaming Boris for Sir Kim resigning, forgetting of course that Boris did not leak the information, so it's realistically got nothing to do with him. Let's check it out.
Hang on. So let's delve a little deeper into the tumult of the last few days with, oh, I beg your pardon, let's look briefly at the papers. Johnson has thrown Darroch under the bus, say top Tories. Well, that's a line we've heard earlier in the programme. That's the Guardian's lead. The Mirror, the man with no shame. This is a claim that Boris Johnson saved his girlfriend's job in the face of claims of corruption. And The Times has a story suggesting that Theresa May might try to appoint a new ambassador before her term as Prime Minister is up. So let's now delve a little deeper into the tumult of the last few days with Sir William Patey, former ambassador to Saudi Arabia and Afghanistan and a friend of Sir Kim Darroch's, Alice Thompson, the columnist from The Times, and Richard Tice, an MEP for the Brexit Party, and also formerly chair of Leave.eu. Well, look, let's start off with you, Richard Tice. I mean, do you, in a crude sense, regard Kim Darroch's departure as a victory for Brexiteers?
It was not a question of a victory, but it was just inevitable. Given what came out, his position was completely untenable. I'm amazed that actually it took so long. It was clear to us that, you know, from the middle of Sunday, that his position would be completely untenable. He would have no credibility with the people that he was trying to negotiate with and, you know, discuss things, matters of state, in the White House. So, you know, I'm surprised it took him so long, frankly. I don't really buy this position that, you know, it was all to do with last night's debate with Boris. You know, we called for him to go on Monday. He's gone. It's a huge opportunity now for the new Prime Minister, not for Theresa May. I'm appalled by that Times suggestion. For the new Prime Minister to completely reset the agenda in a pro-Brexit world.
Opportunity, William Patey.
Well, if we start appointing ambassadors, whether they're pro-Brexit or anti-Brexit, it'll be a sorry world, frankly. I mean, we appoint ambassadors to look after the British national interests, and those national interests are broad and varied. And when the government sets the tone, the government of Boris Johnson will set a course for Brexit. I'm sure that that's what he'll do. Any British ambassador from the diplomatic service, from the professional corps of likely candidates, will seek to deliver that. The idea that you send some partisan politician there would be the death knell of an impartial civil service and a professional diplomatic service.
Well, we'd like to send a pro-Brexit businessman who can help do what is vital, which is to secure a quick,
volunteering for the job?
Look, I tell you what, I couldn't have done a worse job than Sir Kim did with these revelations, let's be honest.
Well, that's outrageous, absolutely outrageous. He's our best diplomat we have. I mean, it's utterly outrageous.
Well, if that's the case, then why was he so naive as to make these, you know, make these...
There's nothing naive about that. No one has ever leaked in this way. He never thought he was going to leak.
There was a leak. I'm sorry.
Right, let's just stop that there. We see a clear 3 against 1 on this panel. No Boris Johnson supporter, which is strange. Just a Brexit Party MEP who is right on some points but off the mark on others, in my opinion. We can see the newspapers and host immediately blame Boris and then go on to ask if it's a victory for the Brexit Party, which I have heard a few people say, but to be honest, it's not really a victory for anything, except the person or people who leaked the information. The Brexit Party doesn't benefit from this because they're not in government and they have no say on the US ambassador. If it was an EU ambassador who was anti-Brexit, then it would be a victory for the Brexit Party. But the US ambassador, even though he is anti-Brexit, he won't really be involved in Brexit, as the media are trying to make out. How the host can even ask such a stupid question is beyond me. It might help a trade deal in future, but while we're still technically in the EU, it's not even relevant. Richard rightly points out that the writing was on the wall for the ambassador before the debate. The moment the leaks got published, it was essentially over. Whoever leaked that document essentially gave him an early retirement. Richard rightly shits on the BBC and Remoaning media claims that Boris Johnson got the EU ambassador fired. Even if Boris stuck up for him wholeheartedly, the US administration would no longer take him seriously, meaning he could not fulfill his role as ambassador. The only person who can be blamed for this is the leaker. The ambassador can say what he wants, even if you don't agree with him, and neither do the facts. The US economy is up, so Trump can't be that inept, can he? Richard then calls out the nonsense I have also heard, and is now being reported in the Times newspaper, that Theresa, the EU appeaser, wants to appoint a new ambassador before she leaves. I think you've done enough, love, to damage this country. Just crawl under a rock and fucking stay there. I don't agree with Richard saying it's the ambassador's fault for his comments, when actually I expect derogatory names to be used by most, if not all, ambassadors the world over. As for his comments about a Brexiteer, I don't think it's needed. We do need someone there that gets on with Trump, and then the next British Prime Minister, of course. A Brexiteer there is really irrelevant, as the US is not part of Brexit. A businessman would be a good idea though, so Richard is right on that, but being a Brexiteer would be a side note in my opinion. Let's continue anyway.
He was giving very, considered, valuable advice, which is what ambassadors have been doing for generations and generations, and it's never been leaked. The appalling thing is the leak. The appalling thing is not what he was saying at all.
There was a leak in the Sunday Times 2 years ago from
I was ambassador to Saudi Arabia, and our current ambassador in Tehran will be giving advice back to the government, and as will ambassadors all over the world in Beijing. If the receiving government doesn't like the ambassador and says, we don't like this ambassador, it's craven of a government to give in to that. And frankly, there's an important point of principle here.
It is an extraordinary situation you get to when they can choose rather than us, who we have.
It's not a question of them choosing, but if you've got a situation...
That's exactly what President Trump's done. He said, I don't want to have this person.
Mantra. This is giving Trump control over
who is the
absolutely not. But that's what you said. You said it was clear from
the very clear that
it's the decision of the British Prime Minister, of course. But if that person has lost the credibility in the host nation, then they can't do their job. They can't fulfil their function, which is to represent British interests in that host nation. And we need to do a trade deal with the United States. There are other countries who actually do have business people as their ambassador. For example, the US ambassador here in the UK is a businessman. It's a great opportunity.
That's a tradition of political
appointment.
Yes,
but actually,
and I think that's a real opportunity
really big
for this
mistake
country.
if we go down that route. I don't think we should be going there.
No, I think exactly be doing that.
We want to have professionals, actually. What we don't want is political appointments. We don't
well, it
want
wasn't
people,
that professional if he wrote that sort of stuff and got exposed.
It's the kind of people that pay a lot of money into campaigns. We don't want that kind of person. We want to have professionals who are going to be impartial, who will do what the government of the day asks them to do, but who are not going to be there just because they are friends or under patronage or because they have a lot of money.
Can I
follow up with you, Alice?
Right, so the civil servant shill sits there making the point our government should not give in to the US saying they don't want to deal with Sir Kim. Did this complete idiot forget that the ambassador resigned? The government never sacked him, neither did they cave into US pressure, and Boris Johnson certainly is not responsible for him going. The Cumbucket columnist continues along the same narrative saying the US administration should not choose our ambassador, which they didn't. The ambassador chose to quit because someone in the UK leaked his emails. The only person responsible are the people who leaked the cables, as I've said multiple times. This whole nonsensical situation shows the left-wing media's clear Ramona bias, pushing this story like Boris and the Brexiteers wanted him gone, which they might have done. It's not their fault he quit, is it? This is just another attempt to smear Boris Johnson in his quest to become Prime Minister. Let's be serious here. It is a real stretch to even blame this on Boris. But the BBC and the other Ramonas will do all they can to push the narrative. I love how they all try to shout over Richard when he points out the government will choose the next ambassador, but he still manages to get the point out there. The US ambassador had no choice but to resign. The leak left him with no other choice, in my opinion. The clip ends with them discussing the merits of a political ambassador or an impartial one, which is bollocks. They all claim Sir Kim was impartial, but it's a well-known fact that he was not, and it's also a well-known fact the civil service has not been impartial for years. Now let's check out the next clip.
Do you think our traditional concepts, as we heard Dave Penman talking about the hallowed concepts of the civil service and neutrality, are basically on borrowed time? That things have become so politicised that it's not really...
I wrote my column for today on just because I do feel, I haven't felt this before, but I feel genuinely that the civil service now is under threat. I think from all sides. I think you've had the Brexit Party talking about it, you've had Nigel Farage talking about them, and being very rude actually about the whole civil service, and you are going to get to a situation people won't want to go into the civil service if you keep doing this. There's a huge churn at the moment of civil servants who are deeply dissatisfied because if you constantly blame them for absolutely everything and never give them any credit for anything, and you constantly whittle down everything about them and what they're doing, they won't be able to perform their job anymore. They are independent. They are, they are extremely professional, and they are done on a meritocratic basis rather than on being close friends with anyone.
A lot of vacancies in
a lot of
the Department for Exiting the EU.
Well, there are lots of vacancies, but I've served in a lot of countries where there isn't a professional civil service and the system of government is very weak. We will come to lament it if we set and train a process where our civil service becomes less professional, less impartial, and less supported by the government of the day. This is a very slippery slope. You look at a lot of countries in the Middle East where they suffer from the absence of a good professional civil service. And I've served with a lot of American ambassadors who are businessmen. And frankly, the only reason they survive is because they're underpinned by highly professional, very senior American diplomats as their number twos.
So the Spunk Trumpet columnist thinks that the civil service is under attack, with Nigel Farage also wading in. But what Farage has said is just the facts of life. Kim is a Remoaner. Farage had dealing with him earlier during his spell as an MEP, so he's aware of Kim's Remoaning fuckpig ways, along with many others in the civil service. Considering Remoaners have got us in the shit position now, Nigel is right to call them out. It's a shame the media are not doing the same, really. Instead, the media wipe their ass with democracy and smear anyone who wants to honour it. The host points out there is a lot of vacancies in the Brexit department, hinting at more clear and obvious bias against Brexit from the civil service. So the shitweasel sitting there saying the civil service is impartial is obviously talking complete shit. It talks about countries in the Middle East suffering from an unprofessional civil service, when in actual fact most suffer from running their country based on religious teachings, written centuries ago, that have no comprehension of modern life or technology. Many scholars from these Middle Eastern countries have pointed this out themselves over the years. The same would be true if the UK was still run by the Church of England. Religions are based on ancient teachings that have no teachings on modern times or social changes since then. To blame civil servants is ridiculous in these countries. Let's continue though.
Is it fair, though, to comment that permanent undersecretaries, distinguished former ambassadors, do all tend to be on the Remain side of the argument when they come out of civil service terms? We don't see them lining up 50-50, do we?
But I think the point is that these are all ex-civil servants. None of the permanent secretaries, none of the current crop of civil servants have come out in favour of Remain, and they won't. They will serve the government of the day. I have served...
But in terms of their underlying... Is there an underlying conservatism,
we know that
small c?
Senior civil servants today in employment in the government are actively trying to damage, delay and stop Brexit. It's been going on and on.
And it was
led...
You have
no evidence for that.
It was led by Ollie Robbins, who negotiated a woeful agreement.
By the Tory party. I thought it was extraordinary when they announced that he was leaving, that he was booed by members of the Conservative Party. I think that's appalling. I think this is a man who's tried his best.
He did a terrible job, and quite rightly that deal...
I know
his best was not good enough.
Well, it's very difficult with the MPs as they are.
Lots of my former colleagues who've served well in the Department for Exiting the EU, who've served well in in the jobs they've been given, because they're professional civil servants. They're not propagating their own views.
They're implementing the policies. And you need professional negotiators to negotiate the most important agreement since the Second World War.
So the host points out that the civil servants all come out as Remainers when they leave their jobs, which the civil service shield tries to claim, well, they are no longer serving, so it's okay, and the ones that do serve don't say they want to remain, which is completely fucking ridiculous. Take a look at Parliament and all the MPs who voted Remain, then claim to be Brexiteers. None of them are Brexiteers. We all know this. Tom Harwood even pointed it out on Question Time last week.
The reason why Brexit hasn't happened is because Parliament looks like this panel. There are 4 of you who voted Remain and just me who voted Leave, and that's about
There's
the ratio.
only one person in this panel who is campaigning to Remain. I'd just like to point out.
But I think what we've discovered about the last 3 years is that how you voted in the referendum actually matters. And however many times you say that no deal is better than a mad deal, you actually have to mean it.
Richard then points out the obvious fact that civil servants are actively trying to damage Brexit and prevent it. The MPs who claim to be Brexiteers are doing the same things along with the Remoaning fuckpigs that make up the media. I love how the panel tries to shout him down asking for proof of his claims, which is a bit fucking rich considering the BBC has Remoaners on there every day, claiming Brexit will do this and that and it's a catastrophe, and how a no-deal Brexit will be chaos and the end of the UK and all this other nonsense, with zero evidence. You never hear the BBC host asking them to provide evidence for their wild and baseless claims every day, do you? What a complete fucking shitweasel this host really is at allowing these people to do that when they don't ask for evidence themselves when it's on the other foot. The civil service fuckpig then sits there saying the department to leave the EU has done a good job. What planet is this mud cunt actually living on? Because it ain't this one. The government and civil service have done all they can to piss Brexit up the wall because they don't believe in democracy if it goes against what they want. Now let's move on to the next clip.
Let's move it on a bit and just talk about what effect Prime Minister Johnson, assuming that's what we're going to have, is going to have on these trends and on the climate between top officials and government ministers. I mean, he hasn't got an explicit Trump-style drain the swamp agenda, has he? Can they coexist happily, or do you foresee more and more political pressures?
I think it's hard to know yet. I think that Boris Johnson was actually quite rude about some of the civil servants doing the negotiations. He's never outrightly come out and said that he doesn't think they're up to the job. But I also think that you look at what he said in the debate, and he wasn't prepared to back Sir Kim. That was quite an extraordinary thing to do. It was one of the first times when we've seen him actually put on the spot and have to decide something that's quite important that he would be doing as a Prime Minister. And I don't think he came out of it very well.
Sorry to interrupt. Do you agree with the analysis of some people today who've been saying it's been a damaging episode?
I quite like the bus analogy, because Boris is always about buses, isn't he? So
look, the Tories have been caught trying to defend the indefensible. He should have fallen on his sword much earlier. You know, the truth is, these revelations have led to a humiliation with our most important trading and security partner. And if he is such an experienced diplomat, why was he so naive to write in the way he did, knowing that it could well have been leaked?
What if it emerges that the person who leaked it is someone on the Brexit side of the argument? That it was a deliberate political act to embarrass him, knowing that President Trump would bite back.
I've absolutely no idea who was involved in the leak.
Of course we don't know.
But in a sense, everybody's focusing on the leak. Focus on the outcome. The outcome is, you know, actually you've got supposedly an experienced civil servant, diplomat, who actually wasn't very diplomatic in the language he used. He could have written it in complete...
That's normal
as diplomatic. It's seen by the general public.
Well, then that's
it's his job to balance.
He needs to give his honest advice.
The role of an ambassador is not to be polite to his host.
No, but he could have written it in a completely different way, which wouldn't have led to this international humiliation. Well, clearly it's not private. And all of us, when we write electronic communications, you have to write it on the basis that it could well be seen or leaked.
So again we hear from the spunk trumpet Alice, who complains that Boris did not back the ambassador, when actually Boris said he's not going to presume he will win the leadership contest to become the Prime Minister, and also stated that the leaker is responsible for this, not the ambassador. Even if you don't like what the ambassador said, he had a right to say it under the freedom of speech we all fight to uphold. The leaker cost him his job. The BBC and left-wing fuckpigs need to focus on that. But of course, the Boris and Brexit derangement syndrome requires them to use all opportunities possible to smear Boris and any Brexiteer they can. Why do you think they got a Brexit Party MEP on the show and not a Tory MP who supports Boris Johnson? The token Brexit Party MP is just there to make this look a little less biased than it actually is, but it's still a 3 against 1 panel, which is standard for the BBC these days. Richard points out that the Tory party backing him was not a good idea, but Richard is forgetting the government needs to back him just out of respect for their ambassador while he's still in the USA. When he's back, they can change, but in public, while he is still there, it's only decent for them to defend him at least to some degree, which Theresa did, and it should have been her, as she is going, so it won't matter what she does in the long run. The leadership contenders should have stayed out of it, as Boris rightly tried to do, and is now being smeared for it. What an absolute shock to no one that is, though. The host then asks, if it's found out to be someone who's a Brexiteer, what will happen? Well, the answer is the exact same as if it's a Remainer, should they be implicated in it. Either way, the motive will be the same. And while I don't know what the consequences of this would, should be, or nor do I even really care, the punishment should be the same, regardless of who it is. So the politics of the person is irrelevant. They obviously did what they wanted and got the desired result. I would say it's as likely to be a Remainer as it is as likely to be a Brexiteer. Because the Remainers will do anything in their attempt to smear Boris Johnson, knowing he would not back the Remoaning ambassador. And the BBC would jump on any chance they could get to smear Boris Johnson. In my opinion, Richard is far too hung up on the ambassador's words. The issue is the person who leaked it and the left-wing media's attempt to smear Boris Johnson because he wants to push for a no-deal Brexit if we need to. We have already seen it multiple times since the contest began, with even...
Jeremy Hunt. I'm so sorry, Jeremy Hunt. I've never said that before in my life. It's usually men who say that.
Starting to resort to attacks on Boris Johnson during the live debates. because he likely knows Boris has already won and will be the next Prime Minister. Richard is right though that when you write anything digitally, there is always a chance it might be leaked. It's a risk everyone takes, and in this instance, it has come back to bite him in the arse. Now let's check out the final clip from this segment.
But is that the death of candid advice then?
Well, I think it might be. If we expect that whatever we write is going to be leaked by some politician in London who's got a different agenda, then civil servants will stop giving the sort of candid advice. They'll have to save it until they have one-to-one conversations with ministers.
It's not candid to call someone incompetent and inept. It's highly subjective.
It's also true.
It's also true. Suggest that he's indebted to dodgy Russian financiers. I mean, come on. You know, he had no evidence for making those sort of highly subjective comments and observations. He could have written it in a completely different way.
He was reporting on a White House that was incapable of delivering consistent policy. Nobody knows what the policy is. You look at the flip-flop on Iran, on various other policies. It's a perfectly legitimate assessment that many American commentators have made about the ineptitude and the incompetence of the Trump administration. So you can't argue about its veracity.
Can I ask you that question as well about the leak inquiry, and if it does point to someone, the old cui bono idea that wanted Kim Darroch out the way, is pro-Brexit. What will that do to the atmosphere?
Well, I think that you keep saying it's a politician. We don't know who it is. We don't know if it's a civil servant. We don't know if it's a politician. We don't know who it is. But it is very important to find out. And actually, I think that we will get to the bottom of it. I think it's one of those situations where I think that
the police are involved.
The police have become involved.
I mean, come on, it's not a police matter.
We do need to know.
The police should be focusing on violent crime.
It's a classified.
This is a process matter.
It's a breach of a highly sensitive classified matter.
Well, hang on. What was the sensitivity? It was an official document. It wasn't secret or top secret. Let's be very clear.
I'm afraid we must end it there. I'm terribly sorry. Richard Tice, William Patey, Ellis Thompson, thank you all both very much indeed.
Now, I've heard a few times people saying politicians in London have been leaking these emails. So maybe there is a suspicion that it's an MP who has leaked it. I wonder which one and what their motive was. Is it a smear attempt by a Ramona to hinder Boris Johnson's leadership campaign? Possibly undermine the US-UK relationship? Or is it a Brexiteer wanting a more pro-Brexit, pro-Trump ambassador to help build a closer relationship after Brexit? I guess we will have to wait and see. Richard points out that a lot of what the UK ambassador has been saying is highly subjective opinion and stuff he has heard at left-wing cocktail parties in the US. You know, the Russian collusion nonsense and the usual shit they pump out over there. The civil service shill sits there trying to make out like Trump is useless when, as I've already said, America is doing really well since Trump took over. Even people I know in the US who did not support Trump have admitted that his policies are working and they are now employed because of them. Can't be that bad, is it, if people who don't actually like Trump are singing his praises because he's helping put money in their pockets. The media's Trump derangement syndrome won't allow them to point that shit out though. They just get these worthless fuckpigs on their shows to spout bullshit. Now, at the end of it, Richard calls out the fact that the document is not even classified or top secret, so should not be a big deal, and police involvement is silly. Now, if that is the case, then I would place money on this being a dirty smear attempt either against Boris Johnson or someone who wants a Brexiteer in the US ambassador's role. I'm leaning towards more of a Ramona actually at the moment, based around it not being classified. Their motive is probably the most interesting thing about this case, though. So there we have it, yet another anti-Boris, anti-Brexit, anti-Trump show with a 3-to-1 bias against Brexit, Trump and Boris. The fact that anybody could blame the ambassador's resignation on Boris is ridiculous. The guy had to go because of the leaker. Even if Boris backed him and went to the US to show his support, Kim Darroch had to quit the role because someone linked his harsh words against Trump, and the US administration would no longer take him seriously. The media are making the most out of this whole story though, using it as another attempt to stop a no-deal Brexit by smearing Boris Johnson with baseless claims that it's his fault this guy had to quit. So I'm going to end the video there guys anyway. Let me know what you think down in the comments section below as always. Remember to leave a like and share the video as it helps the channel a lot. And consider subscribing with the little bell to be notified when I upload a new video. Thanks for watching and I'll see you all in the next one.